7%. That's how many people make it to minute 5:30 in this kind of content. Not because the other 93% are lazy or distracted. They leave because something in them says stop, turn back, this is enough, and they listen. You're still here, which means you're either part of that 7% or you're about to find out why you're not. Either way, what I'm about to tell you will make sense of something you've probably felt but never named. There's a point in every real transformation where most people bail. Not at the beginning, not at the end, right in the middle, right when it starts to work. Let me explain what actually happens at that moment. Most people think transformation is about gaining something. New habits, new mindset, new beliefs, new version of yourself. They start the process excited. They read the books, watch the videos, do the practices. And for a while, it feels good. It feels like progress. Like you're finally doing something about your life. But then you hit a point where it stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like loss. Because real transformation isn't about adding a better you on top of the old you. It's about the old you dissolving. And when that starts to happen, your entire being goes into alarm mode. Everything you've been, every pattern you've run, every identity you've built, every way you've explained yourself to yourself, starts to crack. And that cracking, that's not a malfunction. That's the point. But here's the thing. Your mind doesn't know the difference between transformation and danger. All it knows is that the structure it's been using to navigate reality is becoming unstable. So it does what it's designed to do. It tries to get you out of there. And this is where the 93% exit. They don't leave because transformation isn't real. They leave because it is. They hit the edge of their old operating system. And their mind says, stop, go back. This isn't safe. And they believe it. They call it intuition. They call it common sense. They call it being realistic. But what it actually is resistance, disguised as wisdom. Minute 5:30 in a video is just a metaphor. In real life, that moment looks different for everyone. For some people, it's the third week of meditation, when the calm wears off and you're just sitting there with everything you've been avoiding. For others, it's the moment a new way of living starts to feel possible, and the old way starts to feel like a lie you've been telling yourself. That's the threshold. That's where people turn around. Not because they can't go further, but because going further means they can't go back. By the way, our shared space of light and awareness is on its way to 100,000 people. Thank you to everyone who subscribes and brings this moment closer. So what happens at minute 5:30? What is that moment exactly? It's the moment when the comfort of the message ends and the discomfort of application begins. It's when you stop being a spectator of the idea and you start becoming implicated by it. It's when the information stops being interesting and starts being threatening. Because if what you're hearing is true, then something about the way you've been living is false. And nobody wants to hear that. Here's what most people don't realise about the journey of waking up or transforming, or whatever you want to call it. The hard part isn't understanding the concept. The concepts are actually pretty simple. Letting go. Being present. Releasing resistance. Seeing through the illusion of separation. These aren't complicated ideas. The hard part is what happens when you actually start to do it. When you start to let go, you feel like you're falling. When you start being present, you notice how much you've been avoiding. When you release resistance, you realise how much of your identity was built on fighting. When you see through separation, you lose the story of who you thought you were. And that feels like dying, because in a way it is the you that you've been defending, explaining, improving, maintaining, that you has to end for something else to begin. And your mind, which has spent years building that you, doesn't want to let it go, even if that you is miserable, even if that you is exhausting. At least it's familiar. The threshold at minutes 5:30 is the moment your mind realises this isn't just information. This is an invitation to change. And change at that level isn't a makeover. It's a dismantling. So your mind does what it does best. It creates an exit. Suddenly you remember something you need to do. Suddenly the video feels too long. Suddenly the person talking sounds arrogant or weird, or like they don't really know what they're talking about. Suddenly you get bored. Suddenly you get skeptical. Suddenly you get distracted. And you leave. Not because the content got worse, because it got too close. This happens everywhere. Not just in videos. It happens in therapy, right before a breakthrough. It happens in relationships, right before real intimacy. It happens in meditation, right before the mind quiets. It happens in any practice, right before the practice starts to rewire you. There's always a moment where the old way of being senses what's coming and makes one last attempt to survive. And for most people, that attempt works. They pull back, they rationalise it, they tell themselves they'll come back to it later. They never do, because later they're back in the comfort of the familiar. And the familiar doesn't ask you to change. This is why transformation is rare. Not because it's complicated, but because it requires you to stay in the space where your mind is screaming at you to leave. It requires you to feel the discomfort of dissolution and not interpret it as a sign that something's wrong. Most people think discomfort means stop, but in transformation, discomfort means you are finally in the right place. Think about it like this. Imagine you've been living in a house your whole life. The house is small, dark, kind of uncomfortable, but it's yours. You know every corner. You know where the creaky floorboards are. You know how to navigate it in the dark. Then one day someone tells you there's a bigger house right next door. Brighter, more space, better in every way. All you have to do is walk through the door. So you start walking toward the door. And as you get closer, you feel it. The pullback. The fear of leaving the only house you've ever known. What if the new house isn't real? What if you can't find your way in the dark there? What if you don't know how to be in that space? Minute 5:30 is standing at that door. The old house behind you. The new house in front of you. And every part of you that's invested in the old house is yelling at you to turn around. 93% do, 7% walk through. Here's the secret about those 7%. They're not braver, they're not smarter, they're not special. They just understand something the 93% don't. They understand that the fear is supposed to be there, the discomfort is supposed to be there, the resistance is supposed to be there. It's not a sign that they're on the wrong path. It's confirmation that they're on the right one. Because if there's no resistance, there's no edge. And if there's no edge, there's no transformation. you're just rearranging furniture in the same house. Real transformation happens at the edge. And the edge is uncomfortable. That's how you know it's the edge. So if you're still here, if you made it past minute 5:30, here's what you need to understand. You're not here by accident. You didn't just randomly have more patience than everyone else. You're here because some part of you is ready. Not the part that wants to feel better, or be better, or look better. The part that's tired of pretending. The part that's ready to stop defending the old and start discovering what's actually here when the old dissolves. That part doesn't need convincing. It just needs permission. Permission to stay when everything says go. Permission to feel the discomfort without making it mean something's wrong. Permission to let the old you dissolve without panicking and trying to reconstruct it. You know what's interesting? The people who make it through that threshold almost never regret it. But the people who turn back, they spend years wondering what would have happened if they'd stayed. They circle back to the same ideas, the same videos, the same books, hoping that maybe this time it'll be easier. It never is, because the threshold doesn't move. You either cross it or you don't. And here's the part that really matters. That threshold isn't just in videos or books or meditation or therapy. It's in your life. Right now, there's something in your life that's asking you to let go. Some identity, some story, some way of being that used to work but doesn't anymore. And you're standing at the edge of letting it dissolve. And every part of you is coming up with reasons to hold on. That's your 5:30 moment. And what you do with it determines everything. Do you stay or do you leave? Do you trust the discomfort? Or do you interpret it as danger? Do you let the old you crack open? Or do you spend more years defending it? Because here's the truth. The 7% aren't a special club you're born into. They're just the people who stayed when staying felt impossible. They're the people who recognised the exit ramp for what it was and drove past it. They're the people who understood that transformation doesn't feel like progress. It feels like free fall. And they jumped anyway. You're built different if you understand that the fear is part of the process. Not evidence that the process is wrong. You're built different if you can sit in the space between who you were and who you're becoming without rushing back to the familiar. You're built different if you can let your mind scream at you to stop and you keep going anyway, not because you're ignoring your mind, but because you finally understand what it's trying to protect. It's trying to protect a version of you that's already gone. And protecting something that's already gone is not wisdom, it's just delay. So if you made it this far, you already know. You're part of the 7%, not because you're better, but because you stayed. And staying is the whole game. The question now is, what are you going to do with that? If this video changed something in you, write in the comments, I stayed. Write it as your promise. Nobody